A young couple had just woken up one morning, but their mood quickly soured over plans for an upcoming trip. Kat, the girlfriend, had managed to secure a rare 10-day vacation from work, and they had planned to travel together the following week. However, as the date approached, Jim, her boyfriend, told her he had suddenly taken on a project for an advertising company that happened to fall exactly during their planned trip. Since the pay was good, Jim didn't want to give it up. Kat was upset upon hearing this, and, without saying much, turned to the bathroom to get ready for the day. Seeing her reaction, Jim tried to comfort her, suggesting she might ask her company to reschedule her leave. When she didn't respond, he shrugged and went to the fridge, grabbing a steamed bun. He started scrolling through short videos on his phone while eating breakfast. Soon, a news report caught his attention. The host was interviewing a medical doctor about a recent outbreak. The doctor explained that most people thought it was just a typical flu season, but his research indicated the situation was more complicated. The virus's genetic sequence bore a striking resemblance to the rabies virus, meaning it had the potential to mutate in dangerous ways. The host laughed off the doctor's warning, dismissing it as nonsense. After all, the virus had been spreading for some time, and there had been no reported deaths so far. Jim didn't pay much attention either. After finishing his breakfast, Jim stepped out onto the balcony for some fresh air and noticed something unusual. On the rooftop of the building across from his apartment, an old man was wandering strangely. Concerned, Jim called out to him. The man slowly turned around, revealing a blood-stained white shirt and a blank, emotionless stare, clearly not someone normal. Just then, Kat appeared, freshly washed and ready for work. She tapped Jim on the shoulder. Jim told her about the strange old man on the rooftop, but Kat showed no interest. She was already running late for work. When Jim looked back again, the old man had vanished. At that moment, their neighbor came out to water the plants on his balcony, looking unwell. Jim asked about his condition and learned that the neighbor was suffering from a cold. After exchanging a few casual words, Kat headed off to work. Jim quickly hopped on his motorcycle to give her a ride to the subway station. On their way, the couple witnessed a horrifying murder. The killer was caught on the spot by the police, while the victim lay on a stretcher, bloodied and beyond help. Shocked and scared, they hurried to leave the scene as fast as they could. After safely dropping Kat off at the subway station, Jim passed by the crime scene again on his way home. But this time, he only saw a police car parked with its doors wide open. Although puzzled, Jim didn't pay much attention and continued on. Down in the neighborhood, he stopped at a breakfast shop and ordered an iced Americano to take home. While waiting, a disheveled man with tangled hair suddenly shuffled inside barefoot. It was the same strange old man Jim had seen on the rooftop. Two young men nearby noticed the old man and kindly asked if he needed help. Instead of accepting, the old man suddenly spun around and spat a huge wad of phlegm right in one of the young men's faces. Everyone was stunned by this shocking turn of events. Before the shop owner could react, the old man grabbed him and smashed freshly fried fries onto his head. Jim rushed forward to pull the old man away, but was horrified by the wild look in his eyes and stumbled backward. Even more terrifying, the young man who had just been spat on suddenly went mad and attacked his own companion. Sensing things had gone terribly wrong, Jim panicked and backed out onto the street, with the crazed old man snarling and advancing on him step by step. But the next moment, the crazed old man was suddenly struck and thrown aside by a speeding car. Carefully, he got up and saw that the old man was already dead. What shocked him even more was that the driver of the car was also crazed. Meanwhile, the young man from the restaurant chased after Jim, and shockingly, some people nearby, driven to desperation, even jumped off the rooftops. What on earth was going on? When Jim turned around again, he found himself surrounded by a group of crazed individuals glaring at him like predators. Panicked, Jim immediately ran off, with the crazies chasing after him relentlessly like zombies. Luckily, he had kept himself in good shape and managed to sprint all the way to his apartment building, slamming the steel door shut behind him to keep them out. Back inside, Jim gasped for breath and quickly cracked open a can of beer to calm his nerves. He wanted to call Kat to check if she was safe, but no one answered. Desperate to understand what was happening, he turned on the TV, only to be met with emergency broadcasts warning residents to stay indoors. It became clear that the medical expert had been right. The virus had mutated, turning infected people into violently insane maniacs. Jim grew deeply worried about Kat's safety, but, unable to reach her by phone, he resorted to sending her a text message, anxiously awaiting a reply. Unexpectedly, a figure suddenly appeared behind Jim. Before he could even react, the person lunged at him with a pair of scissors. It was his neighbor from next door. Without saying a word, the crazed neighbor slashed off 2 of Jim's fingers. Jim could only watch in horror as the neighbor, now completely insane, bit into his own severed fingers, muttering foul words about taking care of Jim's girlfriend. Furious and desperate, Jim grabbed a nearby tool and smashed it hard against the neighbor's head. Before the man could get up, Jim slammed the door shut and escaped. Although he knew it was even more dangerous outside, Jim decided he had to find his girlfriend. But as soon as he reached the street, terror gripped him. Several infected individuals were brutally torturing a survivor right there in front of him. With his motorcycle still parked outside the restaurant, Jim risked running over to grab it. Fortunately, he wasn't noticed by the infected and managed to get to the bike safely. However, when he looked up, Jim saw more infected lurking further down the street. Starting the motorcycle would definitely give him away with the noise of the engine, but he had no choice. Bracing himself, Jim kicked the engine into life, immediately drawing the attention of the infected who charged at him with ferocious intent. Jim immediately panicked, struggling to start his motorcycle for what felt like an eternity. Just as the infected were closing in, he finally managed to kick the engine to life and sped off. The horde behind him grew larger and more aggressive, and one infected, wielding a gun, even fired a shot that shattered his rearview mirror. Without looking back, Jim raced forward at full throttle, barely escaping the deadly pursuit. Meanwhile, Jim's girlfriend Kat was already in danger on the subway. She had put her phone on silent so she could focus on reading, which is why she hadn't answered Jim's calls. But sitting beside her was a sleazy businessman who kept trying to strike up a conversation, distracting her and making it impossible to concentrate. Despite Kat's repeated attempts to brush him off, the businessman was annoyingly persistent. Soon, the subway arrived at the station and a few passengers boarded. To get away from the annoying businessman, Kat offered her seat to a woman nearby. The subway car fell into a sudden silence. But nobody expected what came next. A young man wearing sunglasses suddenly transformed, going on a rampage and attacking indiscriminately. The businessman was terrified, frozen in shock, while Kat stared in disbelief. She never imagined that the brutal murder they witnessed earlier that morning would eerily repeat itself here, underground on the subway. As more victims fell, the subway car quickly filled with the metallic stench of blood and rust. 2 passengers managed to wrestle the rampaging attacker to the ground, but before anyone could catch their breath, more infected suddenly appeared, launching attacks on everyone nearby. The sleazy businessman also transformed, brutally stabbing Big Sis in the left eye with an umbrella, a chilling detail that would prove important later, so make a note of it. Chaos completely erupted inside the car. Luckily, the subway soon arrived at the next station. Kat grabbed Big Sis's arm and they dashed out just in time, though Kat's phone was left behind in the mayhem. Racing through the underground tunnels, they soon realized the mutated businessman was chasing after them. In her panic, Kat failed to watch where she was going, and they collided headfirst into a burly man. At first, the man looked ready to lash out, but his expression softened when he saw Big Sis was hurt. He asked what had happened, and Kat quickly pointed behind them, warning that someone was trying to kill them. The man turned just in time to see the sleazy businessman closing in. Without fully understanding the situation, he charged forward and landed a punch. But his victory was short-lived. The businessman grabbed his head, sunk his teeth viciously into the man's face, and the burly stranger instantly lost the fight. But the businessman didn't stop there. He smashed open a nearby firebox, grabbed a fire axe, and swung it down hard on the burly man's head. Terrified, Kat and Big Sis scrambled to their feet and ran desperately toward the subway exit. They finally spotted a security guard stationed by the door. However, when Kat begged for help, the guard ignored her pleas and slammed the exit door shut. Fortunately, Kat refused to give up. Struggling to drag Big Sis along, she sprinted forward with all her might and barely escaped through the closing doors at the last second. The guard had mistaken them for infected and closed the door to protect himself. Meanwhile, the businessman trapped outside snarled at them fiercely. Seeing this, the guard hurriedly escorted Kat and Big Sis away to a nearby hospital for safety. Elsewhere, Jim, having shaken off his pursuers, continued rushing toward Kat's workplace. The streets were a gruesome sight, littered with severed limbs and body parts. He navigated through several blocks and followed the main road, only to find the tunnel ahead completely blocked. With no other choice, he was forced to take a narrow side path. Unexpectedly, Jim only paused briefly to look for a weapon when he saw a group of infected students tormenting someone else. This time, he didn't stand by. Handling a few of the young infected was no challenge for him, and he quickly drove them off. But when he approached the survivor, he realized the person was also infected, and worse, seemed to enjoy the torture and even blamed Jim for interfering. Before long, the students launched a surprise counterattack and invited Jim to join their twisted games. Not wanting to get involved, Jim immediately left the scene. Meanwhile, Kat and her companions finally arrived at the hospital. Thanks to police protection, the place hadn't fallen, and it was filled with injured survivors from various attacks. After a nurse gave Big Sis a quick bandage, she wheeled her into the operating room. It was only then that Kat remembered to contact Jim, but realized her phone was missing. She had to borrow the guard's phone to try to check in with her boyfriend. Before she could even dial, a breaking news broadcast on the TV caught her attention. A military general was speaking live, delivering grim news. The situation had spiraled out of control. Millions had already been infected, riots were erupting in cities everywhere, and worst of all, no solutions had been found yet. Then, another official appeared on the screen, apologizing to the public and delivering a long speech full of reassuring words, but without a single useful piece of information. In the end, he promised to do everything possible to protect the people, defeat the virus, and secure victory. However, no sooner had he finished speaking than the general standing beside him suddenly changed. His expression turned savage, and it was clear he was infected. Everyone watched in horror as the infected general pulled a grenade from his body, pulled the pin, and shoved it into the official's mouth, blowing him to pieces. Panic erupted in the hospital as chaos broke loose. Some people tried to flee, but police officers used their guns to stop them. At that moment, Kat's eyes widened in terror as she spotted the businessman lurking outside the door. She immediately grabbed the guard's phone and ran away. In the next second, the businessman smashed the glass door with an axe, sending the police flying. A swarm of infected flooded into the hospital, committing unspeakable acts on those trapped inside. The security guard hid under a table, while Big Sis, who had just undergone surgery, unfortunately fell into the hands of the businessman again. The deranged man pulled out a secret weapon and cruelly stabbed her injured left eye once more. Hearing the screams, the guard covered his ears in fear, too terrified to make a sound. Only after the screams stopped did he dare to crawl out from his hiding spot. Then, the guard was shocked to see several infected people doing calisthenics in the hallway. Still unsettled, he left the area, only to stumble upon Big Sis in the next room. Except she had already been infected by the businessman. Big Sis was wielding a chainsaw, advancing step by step. The guard tried to escape, but was immediately caught by a large group of infected, and his fate was sealed. Meanwhile, Kat hid in the stairwell and urgently called her boyfriend for help. After hearing her situation, Jim promised he would come to rescue her and told her to find a safe place to hide quickly. But as he spoke, Jim suddenly felt dizzy and disoriented. After saying, "I'm on my way," he hastily ended the call. Unbeknownst to him, only minutes after the call ended, Kat's situation worsened again. Two infected individuals discovered her location, forcing Kat to keep running. She reached the upper floor and used an iron frame to secure the fire door, blocking the infected from following. However, the relentless businessman also chased after her. Using his small frame, he slipped through a gap and entered, but instead of letting the other infected in, he reinforced the fire door with the iron frame once again, trapping the infected outside. It turned out that the businessman intended to claim Kat for himself. Knowing she had nowhere left to run, he began slowly searching for her, boasting that Big Sis was already under his control and that she would be next. But Kat refused to just sit and wait. Seizing the moment when the businessman was distracted, she grabbed a fire extinguisher and launched a surprise attack from the shadows. She didn't stop until she had completely smashed his face in. Just then, a door nearby swung open, revealing a man dressed in protective gear. With the fire door breached, Kat had no choice but to follow him inside. Looking around, she realized they were in a hospital maternity ward. Unsure whether Kat had been infected, the man raised his gun and ordered her to lean against a pipe. When she complied, he turned on the faucet, using a special chemical disinfectant to wash the blood from her body. This man was none other than the medical doctor from the news report earlier. He had been hiding here, desperately working on a vaccine for the virus, but making no progress. Kat's arrival gave him a glimmer of hope. Cases like hers, where someone had direct contact with infected blood but hadn't immediately mutated, were extremely rare. It suggested she might carry natural antibodies against the virus. After realizing the doctor meant no harm, Kat slowly let down her guard. If she truly carried antibodies in her body, she was more than willing to help save the world from this disaster. The doctor then untied her and handed her a fresh set of clothes to change into. However, as Kat prepared to toss her old clothes into the trash, she made a horrifying discovery. Inside the bin lay a mutated baby. Before Kat could fully process the shock, the doctor suddenly injected a syringe into her neck and promptly handcuffed her again. It turned out the doctor had been using babies for experiments, all of which ended in mutation. The liquid he injected was actually the virus itself, as he needed to confirm whether Kat really had antibodies. If no signs of infection appeared within 5 minutes, it would prove she possessed natural immunity. The plan was that once confirmed, the doctor would take Kat to the rooftop helipad where a military helicopter awaited. From there, they'd fly to a lab to develop a vaccine to save humanity. But if Kat showed any symptoms, she would be immediately executed. Overwhelmed by fear and uncertainty, Kat could only send a desperate text message to her boyfriend, explaining the situation and begging him to come rescue her as soon as possible. Fortunately, Jim had already arrived at the hospital, but his behavior was strange. He was casually walking in, holding a machete, and even carelessly dropped his phone on the floor. Meanwhile, the doctor, after arranging the helicopter, lifted the curtain to check on Kat's condition. To everyone's surprise, after 5 minutes, Kat showed no signs of infection, confirming beyond doubt that she possessed the antibodies. The doctor immediately helped Kat out of the delivery room, ready to head straight to the helipad. But just a few steps outside, the doctor was suddenly attacked. An infected individual swung an axe, chopping at his foot. In a critical moment, the doctor pulled out his gun and shot the attacker, but another infected lunged at him. The doctor fired again but missed the vital spot, and the attacker bit his injured foot. Although the doctor finally killed the infected, it was too late. He had already contracted the virus. Kat supported the doctor as they pressed forward, only to encounter Jim at the doorway. But shockingly, Jim had already transformed. Infected at some unknown point, he was no longer himself. Kat was stunned, but the doctor acted without hesitation and shot Jim in the neck. As he prepared to finish him off with a second shot, his gun unexpectedly jammed. Jim seized the moment and charged forward, delivering a fatal stab to the doctor. Terrified, Kat scrambled away, using the doctor's keys to unlock the iron door leading to the rooftop and trapping Jim inside. Even though she knew her boyfriend was no longer himself, she didn't leave right away. Instead, she crouched down and cautiously asked about his condition. Surprisingly, Jim hadn't completely lost his mind yet. He could still hold a normal conversation. He showered Kat with sweet words that moved her deeply. But just as she hesitated, wondering whether to open the door, Jim's tone suddenly shifted. His tender words twisted into chilling threats, shattering any hope Kat had left. Heartbroken and disillusioned, Kat turned away from Jim and walked alone toward the rooftop. Outside, a helicopter had been waiting for some time. And just like that, the movie ended abruptly, leaving the story hanging on this tense and uncertain note.